I have a hypothesis that one of the reasons so many companies embrace this diversity narrative is because it's been predicted time and time again that white people are disappearing. They're not reproducing as much as other minorities, and more immigrants from Hispanic and various brown backgrounds. I'm actually using the language from Vox here. I don't know if it's offensive, but we have more immigrants who are non-white coming into this country. And so I feel like a lot of these companies are thinking, okay, in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, can we survive? And one of the mentalities is that one of the thoughts they had is if they constantly focus on the majority population, by the time the switch occurs, they're not going to have a good foothold among non-whites. So it seems safe in that regard then. If you try and get everybody involved, then you're looking at the entirety of the American demographic and you're future-proof. There's a lot of, cultural incidents, like, I don't know, look at a show like Friends, where, basically everybody's white. The idea then is, are Latinos, our young black children going to grow up and like that show and want to be involved and watch a program like that? And there's a fear that they won't. And there's a fear that news outlets won't be able to attract various communities. Personally, I think this is wrong. Fusion, the company I used to work at, originally started as a Latino millennial channel. And at some point, they just switched and tried to become just a total millennial channel. And originally, they didn't tell me this, but my understanding, based on conversations, is that ABC, Disney, reached out to Univision, and they did this joint venture because ABC wanted to make sure that they had some kind of outlet for Latino youth. And what they discovered was that Hispanic Latino youth in the United States don't consider themselves separate from Americans. A young person who grows up speaking Spanish sees themselves as American as anybody who doesn't. And so producing programming that was in English or Spanish targeting Latinos as an identity group was ineffective. So they ultimately tried switching away from that and going just straight millennial. And, then they tried going straight, diversity, social justice, and to the point where I think they just went off the rails, lit a bunch of money on fire, and kind of crashed and burned. Now it's like Univision, ABC sold off their portion of Fusion. Then Univision changed the name, bought a bunch of properties like The Root, kept trying to go this woke route. It doesn't work. And I think the main reason is it doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter what your race is. It doesn't matter how you identify, so long as you're American. And and not even necessarily American, as long as you agree to abide by the values we have in this country as a culture. If you want to come in and say people aren't allowed to speak, some people are going to disagree with you. But if you want to come in and you want to function productively within the confines of the rules that are set in this country, like the Constitution and the laws, it doesn't matter. And I think this means a lot to people. There are a lot of people who segregate. Chicago's a very segregated neighborhood, and there are enclaves of specific races. That's actually what the article I've pulled up here from Vox is about, and we'll read a little bit into it. It's called The White Threat in Browning America, How Demographic Change is Fracturing Our Politics. I think there's an idea about like implicit racism and bias and things like that. And I will say, in my experience working in social engineering, which is I shouldn't say working, but in the hacker community, it's like most hacks you hear about are actual social manipulation. That's what social engineering means. It means that you can figure out why someone thinks what they do and effectively communicate with them. One of the core rules of this and sales and any kind of interpersonal relationship is that people are more open to those who look like them. And thus we have this, intrinsic racism. So I do think it's a factor, but ultimately I think people want to watch Friends. People want to watch Marvel. They want to watch the Avengers. It doesn't matter what ethnicity, race, or whatever you are. We like a lot of the same things. And I think, in my opinion, we should allow these changes to happen naturally. As the demographics increase, we'll see a natural increase in people appearing in TV shows and movies and jobs. But there's this idea that they're going to force it to happen. And I think that's ineffective. But let's read into the story because it's actually really interesting. It talks about how white people are kind of disappearing. So this, at least in America and perhaps in the world, I don't know. So I don't want to get into too much of the overt weird politics stuff. Actually, this is it says, Barack Obama held up change as a beacon, attaching it to another word, a word that channeled everything his young and diverse coalition saw in his rise and their newfound political power, hope. An America that would elect a black man president was an America in which a future was being written that would read thrillingly different from our past. Sure. In 2016, Donald Trump wielded that same sense of change as a threat. He was the revanchist voice, forgive me, I don't know what that means, of those who yearned to make America the way it was before, to make it great again. This was the impulse that connected the wall to keep Mexicans out, to ban to keep Muslims away. I gotta stop right here. The wall isn't to keep out Mexicans, and the ban isn't to keep out Muslims. I will read on, but let's just say one thing definitively. Those crossing the southern border are not all Mexican. It's a Mexican border. The wall is to keep out people who are entering the country illegally and upsetting the economic balance. There's a lot of issues there. I tend to be for our borders and making sure that good people are coming to this country, and that even if someone's not the greatest, we vet them and figure out how we can help them. But it's a bit of it's an incorrect statement to say it's to keep Mexicans out. It's very hyperbolic, and the ban to keep Muslims away is also hyperbolic. People call it a Muslim ban originally, and it didn't ban every Muslim nation. People seem to forget that Indonesia and other countries are are Muslim. And then even in its current form, it bars North Korea and Venezuela. North Korea, no one from North Korea is going to come here, maybe. But Venezuela, that's legitimate. Venezuelans do come here, so it's not a Muslim ban. It doesn't only ban Muslims. Some people think that adding North Korea and Venezuela was a ploy to bypass the Muslim ban or whatever. And Trump has used the language. It's complicated, but I just want to stop here because look, it's Vox. It's a very biased way to bring things up. The birtherism meant to prove Obama couldn't possibly be a legitimate president. And right, the birtherism, although there were a lot of people who were prominent who were pushing that narrative. I think that's just ridiculous. An America that would elect Donald Trump president was an America in which a future was being written that could read thrillingly similar to our past. No, not really. Donald Trump is the first president in history to support gay marriage and gay rights before becoming president. Not even Obama did that. And there's evidence to suggest that even Hillary Clinton today still doesn't support it in some leaked emails. But don't Google that yourself. I don't have the source pulled up in here, and I absolutely could be wrong. But the idea that Trump is a symbol of the past, it's in some ways, sure, but again, Vox, very biased. You know this. Even people who like Vox know it's biased. This is the core cleavage of our politics, and it reflects the fundamental reality of our era. America is changing and fast. Okay, so I'm not going to read that part because we can see it right here. 2013 was the first year that non-white births surpassed white births, and only by, 11 or 12 or 13,000, about 12,000 some odd births. But I like how minorities is now the majority. It's kind of weird, but this should say non-whites, not. The government predicts that in 2030, immigration will overtake new births as the dominant driver of population growth. About 15 years after that, America will phase into majority-minority status. For the first time in the nation's history, non-Hispanic whites will no longer make up a majority of the population. And this has been predicted time and time again. So let's see, that cross will come in part because America's Black, Hispanic, Asian, and mixed-race populations are expected to grow, indeed. The Hispanic and Asian populations are expected to roughly double, and the mixed-race population to triple. Meanwhile, the non-Hispanic white population is uniquely expected to fall, dipping from 199 million in 2020 to 179 million in 2060. The Census Bureau minces no words here. The only group projected to shrink is the non-Hispanic white population. White people! You are going to slowly go meow according to this chart. And it actually gets really interesting. But I do want to point out one thing here. I don't think it's that white people necessarily aren't having kids. It's that they're race mixing. Like yours truly, So I guess I count as non-white. I'm absolutely, mixed race is one of the smallest minorities in the country. But as, Black, Hispanic, Asians, and white people and others start to, cohabitate in our great melting pot of a nation, well, of course you're going to see, white people drop off. But I will say, when you consider the fact that white people are race mixing, they are having kids, it's interesting then that the other demographics aren't, because it would possibly suggest that Hispanics are less likely to race mix, that Asians are less likely to race mix, and Blacks are less likely to race mix than white people. Or, to say the least, that white people are significantly more likely to race mix than the others. Personally, I am quite fond of mixed race people. I wonder why. This isn't just a statement about the future. It's a description of the present. The economist Jed Kolko notes that the most common age for white Americans is 58. For Asians, it's 29. For African Americans, it's 27. And for Hispanics, it's 11. A new report out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Applied Population Lab found that white births are now outnumbered by white deaths in 26 states, up from 17 in 2014 to 4 in 2004. Okay, basically what this means is, look at this chart. States with more deaths than births among the white population. For a while, like 2004, it was only a handful. But now we can just jump straight ahead to 2016 and look at this. What did they say, 26? 26 states. In these states, I believe it's the ones that are darker, white people are dying faster than they're having kids. But again, I do want to point out, that means like white people with white people, because I'm sure that yes, a lot of white people are dying, but their kids are probably hooking up with non-whites. And I don't see that, I don't know if there's data in this article about that. Personally, I'm okay with that. We can talk about my being mixed race all day and night, everybody, you know it. But I do know that there's a contingent of a specific group of people in this world who are particularly concerned about white people disappearing. And again, I think it's interesting that it's mainly white people who are not, reproducing as quickly, but also race mixing. So for whatever the reason, I think there's something there. Meanwhile, America's foreign-born population is projected to rise from 14% of the population today to 17 by 2060. That's actually not that much, in my opinion. A 3% increase in like 40 years or so. There's something interesting that emerges with this phenomenon. And we can see here right now, they have an immigration survey from PRRI/bookings. Total discrimination against whites has become as big a problem as discrimination against blacks and other minorities. And we can see among all Americans, it's actually split pretty evenly, 49 to 49. Among the black population, it's overwhelmingly disagree. Hispanic overwhelmingly disagree. But among the white population, they're more likely to agree. And among white working class, agree a lot. Now the white college educated disagree. And this is kind of like the last thing I wanted to talk about before I'm not going to read through the whole article, but I often see these college educated upper class white folk who talk about race and all these issues. And you see someone like Anne Hathaway, she posted to Instagram recently that white people can never know the fear of like black people. And that's like an absurdist that's like a classist statement. It's so absurd. Yes, I understand Anne Hathaway, who's been privileged and wealthy her whole life, has never experienced violence. But growing up on the south side of Chicago, I've seen police beat white people. I've had, me and my roommates, we had the cops kick our door in at gunpoint. We've faced discrimination because of our class. It's not the same discrimination as racism, for sure. But to say that I wasn't scared of the gangs killing people in my neighborhoods, that, my friend has a story of watching someone drag a dead body through his alley. And this was it was a mixed race neighborhood, but there were white people there. So this idea that you see, like Bernie Sanders said this too during the campaign, like white people won't understand this. I think that actually is a good point to be made about their own argument, that there's a lot of white people who are wealthy and privileged who don't really understand it. But it's so strange then that they're advocating against these issues that affect class. So unsurprisingly, as more of these upper class and influential white folk attack white people, and as whites slowly start becoming a minority, the population starts waning, of course they're going to see other perspectives and they're going to feel like they're being discriminated against. Nobody wants to be discriminated against. And I think it's fair that white people want to avoid that as well. But I also think that there are a lot of instances where there's unfair treatment of white people. That's not to say that white people have it worse overwhelmingly. I think there's a lot of racism that affects everybody, and it really is impossible to quantify. Certain things, absolutely worse. And we can look at specific issues and be like, yeah, that's terribly bad and only affects like one group of people. But it's like, if you think about like a value system, like if we gave a numerical value to like bad and good things, there will come a time where everyone sort of starts to even out. And groups just continually become minorities, then they will face discrimination, because as we've seen throughout history, minorities face discrimination. It's just a part of what happens. So, I don't know. I've got a couple more videos for you guys today. Let me know what your thoughts are on the whole issue. Again, I'm not going to read through this thing. So anyway, take care. I'll see you in a couple minutes.